Today I'm going to show you how I make sauerkraut. I got my basic process from this book, The Art of Fermentation. I'm going to show you how to turn this one head of cabbage into a bunch of sauerkraut. If you don't want to use any special equipment, just use about 2 glass jars and then 1 plastic bag per jar. Here's the sauerkraut process that I adapted from the book, The Art of Fermentation. We're going to start by chopping the vegetables. In this case, we're just going to go a simple sauerkraut. It's just cabbage. You're going to need to know how much your cabbage weighs. It's not essential, but it'll really help you out. So weigh out your cabbage on a digital scale. It doesn't matter how much your cabbage ends up weighing, but you just need to know the final weight so you know how much salt to add to the cabbage later. Start out by cleaning your head of cabbage or removing the outer layer of leaves. Those tend to be the dirtiest leaves and the least attractive. I don't want those ending up in my final sauerkraut, so I'm just removing the outer leaves from my cabbage. Once you've got your cabbage pretty much cleaned up, go ahead and cut it in half. Then you're going to take each half of cabbage and cut that into strips or chunks, and then take those chunks and cut them into fine shreds or finely diced pieces of cabbage. The cabbage will break down as it ferments and turns into sauerkraut, but it's not going to shrink too much, so really chop your cabbage as fine as you want it to end up in your final sauerkraut. It'll get a little bit smaller, but what you see here is pretty much what you're going to get. I remove the core from the cabbage because I'm not going to chop that up and include it in my sauerkraut. It's a little bit too hearty and fibrous for my taste, so go ahead and just remove that. Once you've got all your cabbage chopped up, go ahead and move it to a big mixing bowl. This is where you're going to salt the cabbage, so make sure there's enough room in your bowl so you can really mix the salt around. Now on to step 2, adding the salt to the cabbage. Go ahead and grab your digital scale again because you're going to weigh the salt out into the mixing bowl. I'm just using kosher salt, but you can use any kind of plain sea salt or anything you have. Salt is going to help control the fermentation process of the sauerkraut. It's technically going to slow down the fermentation process, but it's also going to keep the sauerkraut from growing any kind of mold or any unwanted bacteria. So salt is pretty important, and you're going to want about 2% salt by weight of your cabbage. Since my cabbage weighed about 1,200 grams, I multiplied that by 0.02 to get 2%, and that was 24 grams of salt. So here you can see I added my 24 grams of salt directly to the cabbage. Once you add your salt, just let the cabbage sit out at room temperature for about 30 minutes to an hour. That's going to allow the salt to pull out some of the moisture from the cabbage, which is going to make this next step a lot easier. Sauerkraut step 3, submerge your cabbage in liquid. In order for the lacto-fermentation process to take place, which is what sauerkraut is taking advantage of here, the vegetables need to be submerged in liquid. So you could totally cover up your chopped up cabbage with water and the fermentation would start to happen. But I believe the more common thing to do is to actually crush the cabbage with your hands or with some kind of food processor or something. That's going to release liquid from the cabbage, and you're actually going to be able to submerge the cabbage in its own liquid. Much like my sriracha hot sauce video from a few weeks ago, we're going to use the liquid from the actual vegetables to submerge and ferment the vegetables. It's a pretty cool little process. So basically what you just need to do is crush up the cabbage as much as you can with your hands until you feel liquid releasing. You can get in there with both hands. The cabbage is going to start breaking down and getting a little bit smaller, releasing liquid little by little. Eventually, you'll get some significant liquid out of this cabbage. You can see here just how wet it's getting, and it's releasing purple color for one, but it is releasing liquid that you're even able to see on the bottom of the bowl. Well, you can't see it much, but it's there. Some cabbages release more liquid than others, and that's totally fine if yours doesn't. You can just do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to add a little bit of water later on to make up for the lack of liquid. Now it's time to move the cabbage into the jars where I'm going to be fermenting it. I'm just using these glass jars, as you can see. Use any kind of glass jars that are big enough to hold the amount of cabbage you have. As you can see from the bowl, I'm going to have some cabbage left over because this is a ton. So go ahead and transfer your cabbage into your fermentation vessels, aka your glass jars. I decided halfway through that I was going to add some caraway seeds to one of these jars. I know that's popular with German sauerkraut. I know it's usually done with green cabbage, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to use it in this red cabbage sauerkraut as well. So I'm just putting a few sprinkles of caraway seeds into one of the jars, and I'm just going to mix that around with a spoon as well as I can. I should have put this in earlier, but oh well. Fill the jars almost to the top, leaving a little bit of room. I'm going to show you what you need this room for in just a little bit. I've got my 2 jars filled, and I still have some cabbage left over. As you can see, this head of cabbage made way more than I expected it to. I'm going to find another smaller jar for this in a little bit, and I'll show you that in a second. Okay, we're still on step 3, which is to submerge the vegetables in liquid. So in order to do that, you're just gonna need to start pressing down your cabbage. Try to press it down and submerge it under its own liquid. Even if there doesn't seem to be quite enough liquid, you might be surprised how much there is in there. So just press it down with a spoon as much as you can and see if you can get it underneath a level of its own liquid in the jar. If you don't have enough natural liquid from the cabbage, you can add a little bit of water just like I'm doing. Technically, this water should be salted just like the cabbage was at 3% salt by weight, but I'm just putting in plain water because I've done it before and it turns out fine. The sauerkraut is gonna taste great either way. So add just enough water to submerge the vegetables in the liquid. This is probably too much liquid in the first jar, so I'm gonna try to do a little bit better in the second jar. Just enough liquid to cover up the vegetables and you should be good to go. Press down the cabbage with a spoon until it's underneath the water level, and then you're ready for your super secret special tool. A plastic bag filled with a little bit of water. This is going to be used as a weight. There are a lot of special fermentation jars you can get with built-in weights with second lids that you can press down the cabbage underneath the water, but all you really need is some kind of homemade weight like this. If you're doing this along with me at home, just push down the weight in the bag against the cabbage, and that's gonna force the cabbage underneath the water level, and then just close up the bag up top. What I like about the plastic bags is they just form fit to whatever shape of jar you're using. See, now the cabbage is fully submerged under the liquid, and it could stay like this for weeks. Go ahead and repeat this same process with another plastic bag for however many jars of cabbage you are fermenting. This one stuck out at the top a little bit more, but it's good to go as well. And here's the small glass jar I found that I said I would show you later, baby kraut. The next step is just letting your cabbage ferment for 1 to 2 weeks. Fermentation might sound scary, but all you're doing is really just letting your cabbage sit on the counter for a couple of weeks. Here's what my cabbage looked like after 2 days. Okay, it's day 2, about 48 hours after I've started. And I'm seeing some interesting things in the jar already. I'm seeing a lot of bubbles at the top, showing me signs of fermentation. I'm also seeing a good amount of bubbles at the top of the jar, like right where the water meets the bag. It's a little more noticeable on this bag here, on the sauerkraut that had a little more water in the jar. So I'm just seeing, yeah, some nice bubble action there. Oh, and you can even see some bubbles floating to the top if I shake the jar just a little bit. You can even see some good, real solid bubble action. The bubbles are just kind of moving on their own. So you might start to see that in your jars after a few days. But like I said before, I'm gonna let these jars keep fermenting for, I think, a full 7 days at room temperature. I'll check back in a few more days. Okay, life happened and I wanted to show you about daily updates, but I wasn't able to do that. This is day 10 of the fermentation process, so we're almost at a full 2 weeks. If you'll notice, the cabbage has really broken down and there's actually been an interesting change of color. Whereas the cabbage used to look really purple about 8 days ago, it has totally changed and it looks way more red now. It's totally transformed into a deep red color, and I think that's pretty cool. Over time, the cabbage has gotten a lot softer as well as it's turned into sauerkraut, and it's changed in flavor too. And that brings me to the last step of the sauerkraut making process. Step 5, taste your sauerkraut often. You're really gonna notice a change in flavor as the days go by. On the first day, your sauerkraut is pretty much just gonna taste like salted cabbage. Around day 3 or 4, it's just gonna be kind of fizzy and a little bit tangy. Then as you get towards day 7 and towards day 14, your sauerkraut is really going to get sour. It's going to gain those sour flavors that we just think about when we think about sauerkraut. And honestly, for me, this red cabbage sauerkraut at just 10 days of fermentation was really sour. For my personal taste, I wouldn't have wanted to take it much farther than that. But of course, go by your taste buds. If you like tangy foods, ferment your cabbage for up to a month. I know a lot of German sauerkrauts and sauerkrauts from other parts of the world do push it farther, up to a month, maybe even longer than that. So just go with your own taste buds. If you like sour food, you can definitely push it past the 7 to 14 day mark. Once you're satisfied with the taste of your sauerkraut, it's time to move this to the refrigerator. The cold temperatures in the fridge are going to pretty much halt the fermentation process. It's technically just going to slow it down, so it's really slow. And you can pretty much keep your sauerkraut in the fridge for as long as you want, but it's best to finish it within a few months' time. I make a lot of sourdough bread on this channel, so check out my sourdough bread recipe up here. I'm going to link to it up top. And I've made some other fermented food videos lately as well, so check those videos out right here. I'll see everybody in the next video.